Hey, this is Jaryd Krause, host of the Buying Online Businesses podcast. And in this episode, I'm speaking with Gill from SEO Bits. And she's also the founder of Web Savvy Marketing, where she's had over 20 years of SEO, digital marketing, and sales experience. In this podcast episode, Rebecca and I talk about how to grow a site without backlinks. We also talk about a story where Rebecca shares with us how she built a website from nothing to in 6 months being the number one website in that particular niche without any backlinks, and how she actually did that. Now, it's so valuable to know this. We also talk about in the episode how to do your own SEO audits on your own website, and also how often you should do your own SEO audits on your own website as well. You know, sometimes it can be annual, sometimes it can be, more, sometimes it can be less. So we also talk about SEO tools that you should use to do these SEO audits and other things that you can do to help grow your website. And then we also talk about the questions you should ask an SEO before hiring them. Okay. Now, this is very, very critical. Hiring an SEO can be very, very hard, and you want to ensure that you get an SEO that you can collaborate with and you can work with, and you can learn not just what they're doing, but why they're doing it as well. And then we talk about a bunch more in this episode too. So this is such a valuable, jam-packed, incredible SEO podcast that you're actually going to love. Now, before we get stuck in this episode, I want to tell you that this podcast is not the only way I can help you for free. I have my due diligence framework 2.0, which a lot of people have been raving about. And what this actually does is it helps you know what to look out for when you're buying a website, including questions you should be asking the seller, and everything else that you should be getting information about to ensure that you're equipped to make an educated decision to buy a good website business and not lemons. So to get that, go to buyingonlinebusinesses.com/free resources. And there's some other free, awesome resources on that page you can check out there too. Let's get stuck into this episode, guys. Today's episode is brought to us by Niche Website Builders, which is a company a few of my clients are using and have used for content creation and link building services. They do everything from start to finish. So from keyword research all the way to uploading your completed article for you. We've also had Bob members buy ready-made affiliate sites built by Niche Website Builders. So if you're looking to outrank your competitors' content and build better backlinks, Niche Website Builders and I have a special deal for you. Head to nichewebsite.builders/Bob. I'll put a link in the show notes for you. But again, that's www.nichewebsite.builders/Bob. Hey, Rebecca, thank you so much for coming on. I'm excited for this one. Like I really am. After, seeing what you've done in the industry, how long you've been in the industry, congrats to your success. But I'm really excited to jump into this podcast. And thank you so much again for coming on.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
So before we hit the record buttons, we talked a little bit about, who the audience is. And already first thing that came up into the conversation is how much information that is still out there that is information that people are following, that it's non-serving for their websites in the SEO space, like tactics and tricks and trying to game the system and not playing by the rules, but trying to go, create their own rules. And what do you have to say to that? Is that just not scary?
It's super scary. Like you said, I've been doing this for a long time. And the benefit of that for me is I've seen the progression of SEO. So I do know what's old school and what's 15 years old, back when I started versus what is current day. And people get themselves in such trouble by reading either really old content and not realizing it's old, or reading content from somebody who really doesn't know a lot about SEO, and it takes them down, the wrong path. And it definitely, it does a lot more damage than it does good. And it's hard. And I kind of I have some red flags. So when I get a referral in or someone finds me offline and they come in and they want to be a new client, if they start to talk about specific things, that's usually an indication to me that they're very stuck in old school tactics, or they've read recently some old school stuff and they just, it's problematic, right? Which now I have to start asking questions because I want to know if there's things that are lurking that they're just not exposing because they don't even know to expose it. And but that tells you kind of the state of it, right? And there's certain clients I will not take on if either they've done a lot of stuff that we're not going to be able to dig out of, or they just have really old school thoughts and I know I can't shift it because, you won't have a success with them as a consultant. And that's usually not the kind of business you want to take on.
Yeah, you can't, if you can't shift, like you said, that's the main thing. If you can't shift their paradigm or reality of like, this is going to help your site versus this, what you're already doing is crushing it. And they can't feed into your own belief pattern, which is what is obviously working at the moment because you're running your own agency. Then what's the point? It's kind of like when people I used to do like a lot of one-on-one coaching, and when people wanted to work with me, they wanted to work with me but not do the work. I'm not going to motivate them. I'm not going to push them to do the work. Like the same with you. If you can't persuade them, what's the point in working with them?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, if they're hiring you to be their advisor, they need to let you be their advisor, right?
Exactly.
And I explain to people always the why and not the what. So it's not just the mechanics of what we're doing, but the why. And if they keep going, but no, I read, and I'm like, no, just stop.
It's like, it depends on what you read. Like if you read a book on a certain religion, just because you read it doesn't mean you need to believe it. And then I'm not saying I'm against any religion at all, or that I'm religious around one route. It's just that like you could read multiple books, but does that mean you believe in all of them? And it's it can be scary.
So here's my truth is when I first learned SEO, it was 15 years ago, and I did get myself booted off of Google entirely by making some mistakes. And back then we didn't have like, here's the things you do, here's the things you don't.
Yeah.
It wasn't, there were no like docs from Google at that point, right?
Yeah.
And if you did find them, they were very few and far between. So when we did get removed, the company I was working for, like I didn't even know I was doing black hat stuff. It was just, I thought about something. I'm like, well, let's try that and see how it goes. And it was a really good lesson for me, and I hate to say that we had to restart from, at that time I was competing against like SAP and Oracle and Microsoft, and those were big sites. And we were a small, company, and I was on page 1, got myself booted off. Wow. And I had to restart with a new domain all over again. And, it's with that learning lesson, so when I know stuff's black hat and I will not go anywhere near gray or black hat SEO, since then, I've always there's a clear line for me that I will not cross, and I won't even come close to it. So if I have like a prospect or a client who keeps trying to get to that line or go over that line, I'm out, because you're not going to be successful. And, I would tell you 80% of my clients or prospects are like, I understand, you're the expert. Thank you for explaining that to me. I can see why we don't want to do that. But there's been like a 20% over the years that just continue to plow forward. And that's, for me, that's always an exit point, because it's just, you're asking for disaster.
And you don't want to put your name and brand behind that as well. You don't want to ruin the reputation. Yeah, that's right. That's what I mean. You don't want to ruin your reputation and put, work into something that you don't believe just to, it's especially with how much time you put into the industry and how big you've built your brand already. Now, I guess in this first portion, maybe we just become mythbusters and bust some of these myths about some of these things that are getting thrown around still. I will start off by saying, one, that just because it popped up into my community, so we have people that join our community and learn how to buy websites. One of the guys asked, how do you detect keyword stuffing? And keyword stuffing is almost non-existent from what I find myself personally. Keyword stuffing in terms of like white text on a white page and stuffing a bunch of keywords in there. And what are some of what would be 2 to 3 things that you hear people talk about that strategies they want to try and use that are still very old or even quite new that aren't going to work?
So one is keyword density, right? People are like, no, I know I'm supposed to have this amount of keyword density. It's like, no, Google does not need exact phrase keywords anymore, and that's what you're thinking about with density. Semantics and the language that you use and the descriptions in your, of your language is much more important because it helps Google better understand the entire content of the page. That's one. And I always end up trying to explain semantics to them and how they can use words to make their content be more understandable by humans and search engines alike, and then kind of push them away from that density. The other one is for local search, when they still want to go in and create 10 or 20 or 100 service pages for every single metro that they want to target throughout the United States, for example, right? And it's it doesn't work that way anymore. Google's got Google My Business. It's all about, how far you are physically from the business with the search and, your reviews. And, there's just so much more nuances to local search than what there was 10 years ago. I'm 10 years ago, we did do that, right? We did go after that, but it doesn't apply, in today's world. You just can't rank like that. That's what you do pay per click for when you want to reach a target outside of your, your local area and its local search. So those are the two biggest ones. I'm constantly hitting that. I think, and I would tell you the third one is that you can't rank without backlinks, which is entirely false. In fact, I just did a competitive research for a new client that started in January, and his competitors have no backlinks. And I was this is, just kind of reinforcement to you as I was going to do and looking at your top, keyword phrases and variations of that. I go, your competitors are ranking without backlinks. So we just need to do better, not worry about, we don't need to, I only want you to think about that because in your industry, Google could care less about it. And that is the case in a lot of situations. So, I've never chased backlinks. I'm never going to chase backlinks. I've always said it's traditional marketing that, making yourself freely available like today, right, will bring forth backlinks and the reputation that you need. You don't need to go out and, troll for backlinks and email and whatever else. So those are my three biggest ones.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm so grateful that you shared those because I want to dig into two things. Local SEO isn't so much a thing for a lot of my listeners. I can see where it's silly to have that many pages that probably aren't going to get ranked, that are going to slow your site down as well, and all these other second and third order consequences. But the thing that you mentioned about backlinks is so good to talk about on this podcast episode, because a lot of people in our industry buying websites are buying content websites that are either affiliate sites or ad revenue sites or a combination of both. And they get built very quickly within a 6 month to 12-month period, boost up the revenue, and they buy a bunch of backlinks to boost up the traffic, and then they sell them. And I actually do the opposite. So a lot of listeners are going to be like, wow, okay, because I'm in deep in the space, they probably perceive that I'm buying these types of content sites with a lot of backlinks built. In fact, I just bought a website that has only natural backlinks, and I like to see that the website has done the work of acquiring those backlinks naturally because it's good enough, rather than having to go away and pay for them. And there's risk in purchasing. There's huge risk in purchasing backlinks, and I'm so glad that you said we've just shattered a great belief for most listeners that backlinks are so vital to the growth of a website.
And it's so scary. So when I'm doing and I'll have clients who say, well, this competitor came out of nowhere. And when I go to look at their activity in SEMrush, and you can see all of a sudden this huge spike up from nowhere, right? With another huge spike up in backlinks. And it's it's short term. And I just always tell them, I'm just wait. All we got to do is wait for 3 months, and Google's going to figure it out. And half the time they're all coming from the same IP address. And I mean, it's just or it's a Viagra site and they're talking about, it's something a completely different industry. It's none of this is going to work in the long term. It's just a short term annoyance for us. And it is. And, and sure enough, Google figures it out. And sure enough, that website just disappears into nothing. It's not, that's old school SEO tactics. I mean, Google's so smart today with artificial intelligence and the knowledge graph that it has. I mean, it knows what good content is, and it wants to reward good content that is going to create a positive human experience. And if you don't, put your effort into that, you're never going to have success long term.
Yeah. Oh, so good. I actually like to tell people that Google is one of the biggest companies in the world. And if you can't beat them, join them. And a lot of people are trying to beat the biggest company in the world. They're trying to play a game against Google.
It's
Whereas it's just it's insanity that you believe that you can beat Google. I don't know what else to say to that.
Yeah, and if you just, instead of doing that, right, and just put yourself in the place of Google and think about, what is Google's goal? It's to make revenue. How does it make revenue? Through pay-per-click advertising. How does it get users to the site for pay-per-click ads? Providing really good organic results, right? So the more Google can present the right answer to the person's natural search question, the more users it's going to have, the more ads people are going to click on when they're there. And that's your goal, is to serve the human and make sure that, when you're writing content, you're thinking about your target market and what problems they have and what search phrases they would put in. And then you solve those problems with good content, and you will get rewarded. I mean, I've taken brand new websites, including like my own alpaca farm, from nothing and ranked it very high and dominated the industry within 6 months to a year. And all I did was created good content to answer people's questions. That was it. I mean,
that
there's
might
no
even be
involved. There's no pixie dust, or anything else. It's just like working hard.
That might be the title of this podcast, is how to have the biggest site in the industry in 6 months without backlink building.
Yes. And without pixie dust.
Yeah, without pixie dust. Yeah. I think a buzzword is definitely backlinks in our industry. So
it kills me.
Yeah, me too. It's a warning. I'm glad we talk about it, because it's warning to people who are investors listening to this that want to buy these sites that have been built with a bunch of pixie dust within a 6-month time frame, and they buy this and they wonder why, how come it's all going away in a year?
I mean, what I would want them to look at is internal links, right?
Yes.
So I talk about internal links being the superhero of SEO, because no one understands them and no one understands the value, that how powerful they are, right? So if I were to go buy a large site, one of the things I would do is I would look at their internal link structure. Is there a plan there? Can I see a plan and have purpose? And is it natural? And is it, keeping the human on the site, but also giving Google the directional signals it needs on where to go for a given keyword phrase? Those are the things that I would look for, because that's within your control. You're doing exactly what Google's told you to. They have documentation on it. And it will live on for a very long time. You don't have to worry about it going away in 6 months. That's what I would look for.
Yeah, great. Internal linking, people love tools. What sort of tools would you recommend? Like Link Whisperer, Screaming Frog,
I am a SEMrush girl for sure. I use it daily, at least once a day, probably more like 6 to 10 times a day. I love Screaming Frog for very large crawls. I don't like the UI as much, the interface, but it does provide really good information. If I have to manage a really large site and go in blind, Dino Mapper is very good at crawling an entire site and visually giving you all of the details, so you can see the content silos and how far content's out. And it just shows you a lot of issues that you wouldn't see otherwise. So those are definitely my favorite tools for SEO. And then I use KW Finder. I have used that a lot in the past, but Google's getting more and more iffy on what it actually gives us for keyword data. So I tend to do keyword data research in SEMrush and through competitors, because I get a lot better information.
Yeah, great. I'll be putting links to all of those for everybody as well. So thank you, Rebecca. That's great. Now, talking about tools and stuff like that, there's people that are purchasing websites or looking to get into, doing an audit on a site they already own, because they may not be able to afford the consult of a pro like yourself, or
Yep.
some of these other ridiculously huge brands that are charging 30K per audit and stuff like that. Now, what goes into a simple SEO site audit, like without going too deep into the tactics and stuff? Like what are some of the things that people should be checking if they're going to do a bit of an audit of one of their sites?
So what I typically do and I used to do a lot of audits when I didn't have as many retainer clients, but I would always do a crawl with SEMrush, right? To make sure that you can get a lot of data quickly and it provides data that you can't necessarily see, right? So, go into SEMrush, not just pulling up the data, but going in and setting up one of their projects and crawling the website with a maximum number of URLs that the site has will give you a lot of detail, and you don't need a consultant for that. I looking at their analytics and their Google Search Console, if you can get that access to that information. Google Search Console, what people don't typically do is what they need to do is go in and look at the information on indexing. What has Google found in index that wasn't necessarily like in a sitemap, or the person knows is there? What has Google found but not indexed? And when you have a really bad website that's poorly coded, you're going to see a ton, if not thousands of URLs floating in there that Google's found and ignored. And Google will tell you why it's completely ignored it. And that's a great way of seeing red flags, even if you don't understand what all of that means. But if you go in there and you're like, I thought this website was 1,000 pages, but I'm actually seeing it's 10,000 and Google's ignoring 9 of them. That's an issue, right? And so that starts to show some red flags. And definitely I would look at that. I would look at free tools for accessibility, because Google pushes a lot of information out about accessibility and whether or not the website is labeling things right and it's got the right color schemes that actual normal humans can read and see the difference of. So that's something to do too. And there's tools out there that you can, you can just scan it, put one URL in, it'll pop you back all the issues for the URL. And if you get a huge number of issues in the homepage, that's another problem, because it's going to tell you things that you would have to fix for the website health. Those are the things. I mean, I also look at the meta titles and meta descriptions. One of the ones I love to use for that is Mongols has a Chrome extension that when you're on any URL, you can just click the little whatever. I don't know what kind of fruit it is up in the corner, and it gives you some quick information on the meta title, the meta description, how many indexed URLs are in the website, whether or not that URL has a canonical to itself, which shows an effort of health, shows you quick data on schema that might be found in the website, structure of the HTML5 code and header. So there's a lot of quick information you can get by just hitting a little fruit, and it pops up for you. So those are the tools that I use. And then, I do manual investigation of just as things are logical, and things like that. But definitely some low cost tools people can use to do their own audits.
Yeah, Mangools is low cost compared to SEMrush and stuff like that. There's a lot there that people may not quite understand, like canonicals and schema markup and stuff like that. People that are listening to this, I suggest, like what you said, Rebecca, is just go in and analyze the data and try and make sense of it. And then you kind of teach yourself. If you you go into SEMrush for the first time, normally you go in there and you don't know much, and then you learn it and you teach yourself how to use it.
And the tools do give you help tips, right? SEMrush is really good at saying this is what this means, right? And this is why you should care about canonical links. And I didn't know canonical links for probably the first 10 years of SEO.
Yeah.
I mean, it just wasn't on my radar for things that we paid attention to, because back then technical SEO wasn't as important as it is today. And I think that's one point to make to your listeners. If you were going to go buy a website, don't just look at the content, look at the technical SEO, because the search engines highly rely on technical SEO for being able to crawl, get through the website, be able to render the page, which means show everything that's on the page, and then being able to, ferret through what that information is. They have to be able to do that. And if your technical SEO isn't in check, they're not going to be able to do that. You can have something wrong with a JavaScript on a page and it literally stops the page from displaying. Google will get like a little bit down the page and then there's nothing. You could have 3,000 more words that Google never gets to. So, those are the things that, you need to either find a tool to help point things out, and SEMrush is pretty good at that, or find somebody that can look at those aspects for you and prove that the website's healthy. And no website's going to be perfect, but you want to make sure that you minimize the number of issues that you find, because that's going to be much easier for you to love on that site and nurture that site and get it to continue to grow.
Yeah, when things are good, it's easier to keep going, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So how often would you recommend somebody doing a site audit, and why that often? Sometimes people are doing it every quarter, every 6 months, annually. They might do a big one annually and some smaller ones during, the year. And then there's some people don't do it at all. But like, yeah.
I think it's going to really vary based on the size of the site, the age of the site, the number of people that touch the site. So if you have 5 people that are not knowledgeable about technical SEO or SEO in general going in and making changes to your site, you're going to have a lot more problems. If the site's super old, you're going to have more problems, right? So that's going to dictate it. I think at a minimum, you need to do an audit once a year to make sure that you're healthy. If you do have a large site or you've got a lot of people touching things inside the site, you need to do it much more often.
Like a big
whether
team.
That's every quarter or every 6 months, because people cause issues without even knowing it. Yeah. It's crazy how much like Betty or, John are just going to corrupt things in the website by copying pages and forgetting to update, certain things that they just don't even see. And it just causes confusions to the search engine. So, you really should audit it in those situations. If it's a small site, once a year, just check in to make sure things are okay. And like you didn't load a WordPress plugin that caused havoc and you just didn't know it. So it definitely varies.
Yeah. For example, like if you got a developer that's not SEO, doesn't have the SEO education, they could just create a page, no meta descriptions and titles, and none of it really makes sense in the technical aspect, which it's a pretty standard for a developer to do that. And
it is, because a lot of developers don't know SEO and they don't know what they're missing and how what they do can produce negative ramifications for the website owner. And it's not that they don't care. I mean, I think a lot of them just have no idea. Mm-hmm. And I've been hired before in the past to just come into to like do audits, right? There was one company I had who was a software company, and they had hired a New York agency to build their website. Well, this software company lived off of search. That was where all of their new clients came from. The agency that they hired was used to dealing with very big brands like Coca-Cola and Disney and things like that. They said every single URL within the website to have the exact same meta title and meta description, which basically tells us the search engines that every single URL is the exact same. It makes it impossible for them to tell one thing apart. And they came in, they're like, we just don't feel like things are right. Could you just come in and kind of look at it? And I saw that and I about died. What I mean? I had access to their analytics and I could see all their traffic's coming from search. They would have lost everything, right? Mm-hmm. And that's why, the developer, depending on like what the situation, it is sometimes worth your effort to pay $500 or $600 to have someone come in and spend, a few hours to just check things out, to let you know that you're good, or you have some issues and you need to pull up the covers and look underneath, because there's not goodness hidden there.
That's extreme. I'm so grateful that I got a redesign of a site, like rebranding and redesign by quite a large agency a while ago now. And luckily that I knew that I wanted to keep those URLs the same. But even just that's good. But all the other stuff that's involved with it, like when they're creating the new pages in the code and all that sort of stuff that's design, can really compromise SEO hugely. And I think that's something that people just aren't conscious of when they're hiring a developer to make those changes, especially when you're hiring somebody off Fiverr.
Yeah. Well, yes. Yeah.
I want to talk about content, because you mentioned it briefly 2 times, actually. One from, how important it is to be quality content. usually the best, if you're creating a page, I tell people that for that search term, it should be the best piece of content for that particular search term on the internet. And then you also talked about keyword density. So I've got a couple of questions around this in terms of keyword density, like for people, what does that actually mean? Are you saying that you shouldn't have your keyword 3 or 4 times throughout your post? And is that also a form of keyword cannibalization? So keyword cannibalization is normally when you're writing articles that are could be different, but very similar keywords, and you're cannibalizing that. But is keyword density a type of keyword cannibalization as well? And how many times should they have the keyword actually in that a piece of content? Is it just once in the title and then use some supporting words for it? So I'd like to dive into that.
So when I first started doing SEO, we would focus on 1 or 2 keywords together. That was your keyword phrase for that URL, right? And you had to have it X amount of times and in certain places throughout to be able to rank. And that literally is how SEO was 10 years ago, right? Now you can have one piece of content that can rank for 500 phrases, and they could be, short to very long phrases. And that's because Google is interchanging things automatically. Like Google understands that a sofa and a couch and a Davenport are all the same thing because, semantically, it has that knowledge and it's got artificial intelligence that can just swap them out. It knows it. It knows that male and men and guys are all the same thing. So, where we used to say, what is my keyword density, which is how many times have I used that keyword phrase in the piece of content in comparison to the overall words of the content. And we had a certain benchmark we had to try to get to know we would rank. And if we went way far over that, then it would kind of throw up some spam triggers to the search engines and it would go against us. None of that applies anymore, right? Google would much rather see a piece of content, if it's about something related to males, that you are using men and males and guys interchangeably, because that's how you would naturally write content and naturally speak content. And then it also helps them understand the difference. Like, what is that content about? That's way more important. A description or an example I give to people is, I said right before we got on that I also, in addition to do my day job, I own an alpaca farm. So that's like, I've got 60 alpaca and I have 2 big barns. Now, if I were to write something about a mouse, Google knows what I am. It knows I have an alpaca farm. It knows I'm a computer nerd. Which mouse am I talking about? Is it the mouse on my desk or is it a mouse in my barn? Well, Google's going to look at the semantics of the page and the verbiage I use to figure that out. Am I talking about a keyboard and a monitor and a desk? Or am I talking about a barn and hay and animals? And the words that I use in conjunction with my focus keyword of mouse helps Google understand that content. And it knows how to better use that content in search results. So it's not about how many times I use the word mouse, right? It's about what I bring into that piece of content to really help explain it to the human and give descriptive language so that Google really knows what that is and how to use it. So much more important today than, how many times you use an exact phrase keyword.
Yeah, wow. That's a great description and a great explanation for me anyway. It could be safe to assume or always assume that Google is smarter than I think.
Oh, absolutely. Way smarter than we give them credit for.
Yeah. One last sort of question I want to ask about hiring an SEO. It can be quite hard to, and I've noticed this in not just in SEO, but like hiring anyone, but especially for hiring somebody to do something you don't know too much about, specifically SEO, because it is a very evolving space, very rapidly. Are there some certain questions that people should be asking if they're going to hire an SEO? Like for someone that doesn't really know too much about, SEO or even what an agency could do for them, would there be some questions that?
I would tell you one of the things that people tend to ask right away is, have you worked in my industry? Right? That doesn't really matter. What's important for an SEO for an SEO consultant or expert is that they can quickly learn your industry. right? That they can absorb a large amount of information. So while you're not going to say, like, can you absorb a lot of information? What I would tell you is the default that you want to ask is, have you worked with my industry? So kind of put that aside. What's more important is, have you worked with websites like mine? Mine being, maybe it's a very large directory site, or maybe it's an e-commerce site, or it's, it's a very large blog. Those are the things that you want to know if they've worked with before, because then that will help you understand that they may understand the nuances of what you're doing, right? I would ask them, what's their process? Okay, so that's a big one. You don't need to understand everything in their process, but what a red flag should be is if they say, don't you worry about it. It's my secret sauce. I've got it under control. That's bad.
Yeah.
I mean, a really good SEO consultant is going to give you a proposal and it says, here's the process I'm going to take you through. Here's the things that we're going to do. As the website owner, these are your responsibilities. These are my responsibilities. They need to have a plan. And if there's been a lot of customers I've had, and I have a couple right now that have had consultants before me, they never knew what they did. They would not tell them what the process is. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to give you a plan, and we're going to have a shared project plan in like Basecamp where you can see exactly what I'm doing. And I can give you a report every month that says where I've spent my time by task, right? So, I mean, those are the kind of things that you want to know because they're red flags. And so that will just kind of help you decide whether somebody is good or not, because I'll tell you, if they won't give you their process, they typically don't have one. Right? If they're seasoned and they do have a firm process, they can easily just ramble it to you in a call and let you know what they're going to go through, and then like what your interaction of that is going to be. And they should always be explaining to you the why as well as the how, because SEO should be a learning lesson for the website owner. You should walk away knowing so much more than you did when you hired an SEO consultant because of the time that you spend together working to improve the site. Right. And like, I don't ever expect a client to be with me forever. I've had some last like 7 years. I have like a current one who's been with me for 4 or 5 years. But the goal is, as we work together, you learn what should be done and why, so you or your team can be autonomous if you want to. That's the right goal. And those are kind of like the things I would tell you to ask or try to kind of filter out, because it will help you, help you see who really does know what's going on, who's really focused on your best interests, because they should be, as opposed to just getting you signed up for a big project or a large retainer. And then, possibly handing you off to Sally, who just got out of college, that doesn't know what's going on, which does happen.
A lot in our space. And, hiring VA, have a face of the brand, and then hiring a bunch of VAs to do work where they're just incompetent. And those businesses don't last long, but we can still get caught up. We can still get caught up in working with them. I've worked with the SEO consultant and a digital marketing person that just absolutely sucked. And they had a massive brand and they were huge in Australia. And it was a shame. And they didn't actually explain the process. And because the people that I was talking to were always salespeople or customer support, they weren't the SEOs.
Yeah.
So that's a big tip for people too. And would you say a good rule of thumb would be, when you're working with an SEO that's helping you, if you're not learning how and why, then you should find somebody else that you can learn how and why from?
Yes. Because especially like with who your target market is and who's listening to this, your websites are your bread and butter, right? They're either your main business, or you want that to be your main business, right? Not just a side project, but become, your main income. And for that to happen, you really have to, understand. You don't need to know everything about SEO, but you need to understand, what needs to be done and why it needs to be done. And like I said, a good person will take you through that process. And that empowers you, but it also helps you be a better partner for them. I mean, my best clients are the ones that do want to know why, and that we can collaborate together. Like they can come and go, okay, I have an idea. What do you think? Or I say, I've got an idea. What do you think? And we can kind of talk through that and really figure out the best route to go together, because they have some knowledge and they really know their business, and I really know SEO and I have some knowledge about their business, and together it becomes a really good marriage. That's what you're looking for.
That's perfect. They know their business better than you know their business as well. Like they bring that to the table, and I find this very similar with how I do one-on-one coaching with my clients in my mastermind. Is that they bring so much to the table that they may not give themselves credit for, and it helps a lot with guidance and strategy. So look, this has been seriously fun. I just want to say thank you so much for coming on, Rebecca. And this has been a very powerful episode. I'm sure everybody got so much from it. People have to go away and check out your podcast. So please, can you tell people where to go to find out more about you, and where to go to check out your podcast, please?
Sure. So my personal website is rebeccagill.com. And that links over to my podcast that I've done, to the Digital Marketing Kitchen, which is my current membership project I'm doing. And then, my main website that I've had for, 11 years, which is Web Savvy. So yeah, that'll take you to all places.
Cool. And your podcast is SEO Bits?
SEO Bits. Yep.
Yeah, cool. Awesome. Thanks so much again for coming on the show. Now,
My
guys,
pleasure.
before we go, I want you to think of 2 to 3 people who are looking to buy a website or already own a website and want to know about SEO, want to know how to hire an SEO, want to know what they should be doing with their site in terms of an audit, what they should be doing throughout what we talked about in this episode. Do them a massive favor and please share this with them. It's going to be hugely valuable for them. So that's it from me, guys. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you on the next podcast episode.